Hey there everybody, it's markcrilley. I'm back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about dialogue. This is a topic very near and dear to my heart, and many of you know that I do graphic novels professionally, but I want to stress that this video is not limited to advice about comic books. It really is dialogue in general. So if you write short stories, or if you're working on a screenplay, whatever it is, the advice that I give in this video will hold true for any number of writing forms that involve dialogue. Well, let's go ahead and get on to the first piece of advice. Rewrite until you eliminate word repetitions. Now, this is not limited even to dialogue. This is sort of a general writer's problem, basically. Anytime you encounter repeated words in your dialogue or your narration or anything, you're going back and crossing it out and trying to find another word so as to avoid that repetition. And I guess I would just show you in general the degree to which I am rewriting my own work. This was back in the Meeky Falls days. Pretty much every page has crossed out stuff. And that's just a general thing about writing. They say that good writing is good rewriting. But certainly, when it comes to dialogue, one of the big things that I am crossing out and rewriting for is the elimination of repeated words. Now, in a funny way, I've found an example where I deliberately repeated words to comical effect to sort of show you what happens when you have too many of the same type of word in the same sentence. So Brody here is saying, good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Alec Jablonski. I'm an investigator with the Special Investigative Unit that's handling the investigation of your daughter's murder. And Talia, the ghost, says, "Stop saying investigate so much, you idiot." Excuse me. So this is, on purpose, I repeat, not the exact same word, mind you. It is variations on the same word within a sentence, just to make a joke out of it. Well, if you're doing that on purpose, yeah, that's part of the gag. But if you find that you have accidentally written the same word twice or something pretty close to it, you may want to rewrite, find another word, and replace it. And I'm not even saying within the same sentence like he did, but within the same paragraph or sometimes even on the same page. Let's move on to the next piece of advice. Number 2, a dialogue scene should have a clear purpose. You're not just having these people chat for the fun of it, you're having them talk so as to convey information to the reader. I'll give you an example here from Brody's Ghost Book 1. We have the first prolonged dialogue sequence between Brody and this ghost, Talia. Well, the purpose was quite clear. We need to introduce Talia, tell Brody who she is, and in so doing tell the reader who she is and what her mission is. And her mission becomes kind of the mission of the entire story. They need to find the penny murderer. Well, that all takes place during this scene of dialogue, and having that sort of propulsive goal helped me to make everything in the dialogue scene be streamlined to that purpose, that there's no just sort of goofing around talking about extraneous things. It all keeps coming back to introducing Talia and then very quickly putting across what the main goal of this story is going to be. Now, I'm going to kind of stay with this scene that I just introduced with my next piece of advice, which is number 3. Less is more. Keep your dialogue scenes as short as possible. Now, this is, as with any of these things that I talk about, there's exceptions, and some people may be writing a sort of slice-of-life story with long, sprawling conversations. But I just wanted to point out, like in this case, the conversation really begins here. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. Bam, 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 they get interrupted. Well, why did I do that? I didn't want it to keep going on to page 6, 7, 8. We start to get tired of hearing these two characters talk to each other. So do what you can to cut out anything except the very most important stuff. Wind it down so that you can maintain the reader's interest and move on to the next part of your story. Number 4, avoid prolonged exposition. So let's say you're watching a cheap horror movie and these two guys are in the opening scene driving their car, and the one guy says to the other, "Jim, it's going to be awesome. Just you and me and Jill and Emily in this cabin way out in the woods. 20 miles from the nearest town. Man, there won't even be a telephone." All right, so that's clunky exposition. That's somebody basically dumping information into the lap of the person watching the film. It doesn't even seem natural that he would say anything like that. The guy would already know that information. Why is he talking this way? Well, it's a screenplay writer who is not very skilled trying to get the information out to the person watching the film. Now, I'm going to give you my example of hopefully slightly better exposition than that. This scene where Brody and his friend Gabe are talking, and Brody says, I saw this guy who knows Nicole. Now, prior to this, we have never heard the name Nicole. We don't know who Nicole is, the people reading this story. And we're only going to get that through the following conversation. And Gabe says, and? Brody says, he says he saw her with some new guy, said it looked like they were on a date. They probably were, Brody, so what? Nicole should be like ancient history for you by now. Stop obsessing over her, man. So this really tells us everything we need to know, basically. We can jump to the conclusion. Okay, Nicole was someone that Brody was dating. This whole thing about she should be ancient history. Oh, they split up. Everything sort of falls into place provided you put the little clues together, and that's so much more enjoyable as a reader than the sort of information dump approach that I spoke of earlier. Number 5, pay attention to the degree of naturalism. Do people really talk that way? Now, normally the goal in dialogue is to make it natural sounding, make it remind people of real conversations they've heard, but not always. I'm going to show you an example of both styles held within a single conversation. This character, Kei Hayashi, is talking to Miki, the main character of the story in my Miki Fall series, and he begins his little moment of dialogue by saying, so Miki, there's this new yakiniku restaurant in town. Everybody says it's really great, and I was thinking maybe, you and me, we could... Look, Kay, you're a nice guy. I wish I could be friends with you, but I can't be. Not with you, not with anyone. I have to be alone. It's the way I am, the way I'll always be. So at the beginning, this is very naturalistic dialogue. In fact, I've even added in words like and, and so forth to stress his nervousness as he's fumbling around trying to find the right words. With Miki, she's speaking in this sort of unnatural way, but on purpose. She's, first of all, echoing the words of another character earlier in the story, and she's gone through all this stuff by this point in the story, and she has become a little different from ordinary people as a result. And so I stressed that by having her speak in a way that sounds a little written almost, and you can choose to have dialogue be that way on purpose sometimes, but it should always be a choice. And that's why I said pay attention to the degree of naturalism. I don't mean to say that all dialogue needs to sound naturalistic. No, you may choose not to, but make sure it's a choice, not that you're sort of accidentally making something that doesn't sound natural. Number 6, characters should have their own distinctive speech patterns. Ideally, the reader should be able to tell who's talking just by the words that are being used and the way they are put together. Now, I've already used these guys as an example, but really there's no better example from my own work than that of Mr. Biba and Spuckler. Let me just throw you into this scene and talk about it after I'm done. Mr. Biba begins by saying, Spuckler? Inconceivable. Even in death, I can't escape you. You're not dead, Mr. Biba. You just got swallowed up like the rest of us. Heavens, you're right. By the looks of these internal walls, we must be inside the water snake's Pliptothotamus. Well, I don't know nothing about no Plippy Whatsamus, but it sure is gooey in here. If you'd point us to the nearest exit, I'm sure we'd all be much obliged. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm using words that almost force the reader to hear a sort of vaguely British C-3PO-ish accent coming from Mr. Biba, and more of a cowboy-style accent coming from Spuckler. It's all highly exaggerated, but that was sort of the vibe of the series. I wasn't going for super believable dialogue. It was all for comical effect. And you can tone that down in your own writing to reveal differences in personality by way of the speech patterns. Now, interestingly, I just noticed, after all these years, a repetition here. It sure is gooey in here, and then I'm sure we'd all be much obliged. If I were writing this today, I would probably go back and change one of those words, but it's too late now. Number 7, it can be interesting to have one character interrupt another. Now, you don't want to do this to excess. That could become annoying, but it can be fun every once in a while to have one character cut off another character mid-sentence. In Brody's Ghost, there's a scene where this character is a truck driver. He's talking to Brody, and Brody says, yeah, well, it's the only way Gabe and I figured we could... Kid, you crazy? You don't tell me what you're up to, and you don't never mention names. Jeez. So it somehow makes it seem more immediate and more real to have him not even allow Brody to finish that thought. As soon as he says the name Gabe, he just cuts him off and says, hey, you don't mention names. You know, is he the guy? He's the Brooklyn guy. Maybe we finally found the secret identity. But in any case, that's an example of having a bit of naturalism by way of an interruption. Again, I would caution you, don't overdo it. But it's a nice little trick that you can pull out every once in a while, just to make it remind readers more of an actual conversation. Number 8. Pauses between words can be as important as the words themselves. Now, I know I've mentioned this in an earlier video of mine, but I do want to make sure I get all of my best dialogue advice into this single video. Here's an example from Meeky Falls where this sort of bad girl character says, you see, Meeky, it really is time for you to take the next step. It's just that the next step is for you to bring this whole thing to a very abrupt end. Because if you don't, I will. Now, breaking this into 2 separate word balloons, getting the ... in there, it's just conveying this pause that like a movie actress might use to emphasize the sort of finality of that line. And if we had combined those into a single word balloon and had her say, because if you don't, I will, it's just going to have a different feeling. So make sure you pay attention to that. See if you can hear in your head pauses in the dialogue, and reflect that in your graphic novel, or, I thought I would show, in your prose fiction. This is from Billy Click, Rogmasher Rampage, one of my prose fiction novels. I don't use them as an example too often, but I wanted to show that it is possible to get a bit of pause into your book, even if you don't use word balloons. So there's a scene where Brody is talking to this sort of cockroach-like monster character named Chang Ming. And Chang Ming sort of comically warns him against squashing cockroaches. Basically says, repeat after me, never ever squash cockroaches. And he says, you got that? And Billy says, yes. And then Chang Ming says, you better hope you do. Because after today, if I get word you squashed a cockroach, or even tried to squash a cockroach, or anything that even looks like a cockroach... He turned his back on Billy and walked slowly back to the statue. I'll roast you alive. I'll burn you till your skin gets nice and crispy, like Peking duck. And that is showing you how you might introduce a pause. Of course, there's the ... these ellipses that are sort of forcing the reader to hear a pause. But this sentence here, he turned his back on Billy and walked slowly back to the statue. The point of that really is to force a pause in the sentence. And that's, if you are one of the people watching this video that is primarily into writing, this is a little trick that you can use to convey a pause without actually saying he paused and then continued, which is pretty clunky. You can just put in a little bit of detail about something that happened at that moment, and that way the reader kind of hears a pause in the speech. Number 9, some dialogue scenes need to begin in the middle of the conversation. I'm going to go back to my tried and true book 1 of Brody's Ghost for an example, and here we introduce the character of Gabe, Brody's best friend. And sure enough, we just jump right into the middle of this conversation with Gabe saying, so I say to Hank, I thought we were supposed to be taking on the mob, not just going around cleaning up after them. And he says to me, get this, he says, Gabe, you've seen the chief's new car. Where do you think all that money comes from? Now, I could have begun at the beginning when they arrive at the restaurant and, ordered their deep-fried cheeseburgers. Not exactly a health food place. But I didn't want to waste the reader's time with a lot of chit-chat. that was not providing vital information. As it turns out, even this actually is useful information in terms of the story, in terms of painting a portrait of this world in which the policeman, the integrity of the police force has been infiltrated by the mob. But in any case, the real important stuff in the conversation begins later on when we start talking about Nicole and so forth. That's why I just sort of airdropped you into the middle of this conversation, and I think it can actually be kind of fun in a way to momentarily disorient the reader and force them to sort of put the pieces together and figure out what came before this, what kind of a conversation it is. So consider doing that every once in a while. Begin your conversation in the middle. Number 10, be aware of the rhythm of your dialogue. Read everything out loud to hear how it sounds. Now, this is a tricky one to teach because it kind of comes down to developing a poetic sense of what sounds good and what doesn't. But let me throw you into this example scene. Brody in Brody's Ghost Book 5 is speaking with this woman, and he says, "Ma'am, if I tell you the truth about all this, you're going to think I'm some kind of lunatic." And there's a pause, one of my beloved pauses. And then she says, "Well, if you don't, I'm going to drive straight to the county sheriff's office and tell him all about the strange young con man who's come to town. I'm sure he'd be very interested in talking to you." And Brody says, "Okay, the truth." And then he launches into this sort of longer explanation. Well, these super short sentences, "okay" and "the truth," are kind of put in there to balance out this incredibly long sentence back here. And if you have a whole bunch of long sentences one after another, your dialogue just starts to lack rhythm. And I can't really put it into some sort of a law, but if you do start to read things out loud, as I suggested, you'll hear what sounds good and what doesn't, whereas if you just read it on the page, you might not catch that. So that's a good general tip, not just about dialogue, but about writing in all circumstances. Read everything out loud to make sure it sounds good, because in a way, every sentence is almost a miniature poem. You really should be considering every different way of writing that sentence, rejecting the ones that are not the best, and then choose that very finest one as your final sentence. Well, that brings us to the end of this video, but as I said, there will be another video that talks about word balloons, different things like that. I enjoy doing these videos that offer really, my best advice that I have picked up over decades now of storytelling, writing, and so forth. So let's go ahead and wind this one down. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.